Welcome to the Wize Solutions Personal Protective Equipment Safety Training. My name is Billy Campbell. I'm the Director of Safety. Here's your training. OSHA requires employees to protect their employees from workplace hazards through the use of engineering or work practice controls. When these controls are not feasible or do not provide sufficient protection, the use of personal protective equipment, or PPE, is required. Objectives. Describe the hierarchy of controls as it relates to personal protective equipment. Identify types of personal protective equipment utilized in construction. Explain personal protective equipment training requirements. Explain the responsibilities of employers and employees regarding personal protective equipment. Employers must protect employees. Assess workplace. Eliminate and reduce hazards using engineering and administrative controls. Then use appropriate personal protective equipment, PPE. Remember, PPE is the last levels of control. The hierarchy of control methods graphic illustrates the effectiveness of the systems used to prevent and control hazards. Elimination, substitution, provides the highest level of protection against hazards. The hazard is eliminated from the workplace, or a safer item substance is substituted for the more hazardous item's substance. Engineering controls are the second most effective means of protecting employees from hazards, followed by administrative and work practice controls. PPE, last resort, it is least effective. Engineering controls requires a physical change to the workplace based on the following principles. OSHA 2001. If feasible, design the facility, equipment, or process to remove the hazard. If removal is not feasible, enclose the hazard to prevent exposure in normal operations. Where complete enclosure is not feasible, establish barriers or local ventilation to reduce exposure to the hazard in normal operations. Examples: isolation. Hazard is enclosed, prohibiting exposure to worker. Ventilation. Air exchanges to reduce atmospheric hazards. Equipment modifications. Reduce the hazard through design of the equipment or attachments. Examples: reduced vibration, dust collection systems, noise reduction, etc. Administrative controls includes work practices, requires the worker or employer to do something. Examples: proper procedures, workplace rules and other operation specific rules, JHAs. Inspection and maintenance, regularly inspect tools and equipment, keep them well maintained, remove from service any damaged or broken items. Housekeeping. Supervision. Regulated areas, designated areas for lunch and break times, no eating, drinking, smoking, chewing tobacco or gum, and applying cosmetics in workplace. Limit exposure by time and distance. Shorten amount of time a worker is exposed to tasks involving the hazard. Distance hazard from workers. Examples of administrative controls that could be used to reduce noise exposure are listed here. Note, noise protection will be further discussed later in the presentation. When exposure to hazards cannot be engineered completely out of normal operations or maintenance work, and when safe work practices and other forms of administrative controls cannot provide sufficient additional protection, a supplementary method of control is the use of protective clothing or equipment. This is collectively called personal protective equipment, or PPE. PPE may also be appropriate for controlling hazards while engineering and work practice controls are being established, OSHA 2001. The type of PPE needed by workers depends on the hazards to which they are exposed. Employers must ensure that their employees wear head protection if any of the following apply. Objects might fall from above and strike them on the head. They might bump their heads against fixed objects, such as exposed pipes or beams, or there is a possibility of accidental head contact with electrical hazards. There are many types of hard hats available in the marketplace today, In addition to selecting protective headgear that meets ANSI standard requirements, employers should ensure that employees wear hard hats that provide appropriate protection against potential workplace hazards. It is important for employers to understand all potential hazards when making this selection, including electrical hazards. This can be done through a comprehensive hazard analysis and an awareness of the different types of protective headgear available. Class G hard hats are intended for general service use, such as building construction, shipbuilding, lumbering, and manufacturing. Class G hard hats provide good impact protection, but limit voltage protection, proof tested at 2,200 volts. Class E hard hats are designed for electrical utility work. They protect against falling objects and provide protection against conductors with higher voltage levels, proof tested at 20,000 volts. Class C hard hats provide limited protection, mostly from bumps against fixed objects. Class C hard hats do not provide any protection against electrical hazards. Employees can be exposed to a large number of hazards that pose danger to their eyes and face. OSHA requires employers to ensure that employees have appropriate eye or face protection if they are exposed to eye or face hazards from flying particles, molten metal, liquid chemicals, acids or caustic liquids, chemical gases or vapors, potentially infected material, or potentially harmful light radiation. 1926 102A2. Eye and face protection equipment required by this part shall meet the requirements specified in American National Standard Institute Z87 1-1968 Practice for Occupational and Educational Eye and Face Protection. Selecting the most suitable eye and face protection for employees should take into consideration the following elements. Ability to protect against specific workplace hazards. Should fit properly and be reasonably comfortable to wear. Should provide unrestricted vision and movement. Should be durable and cleanable. Should allow unrestricted functioning of any other required PPE. OSHA Publication 3151-12R 2003. Safety glasses are intended to shield the wearer's eyes from impact hazards such as flying fragments, objects, large chips, and particles. Workers are required to use eye safety glasses with side shields when there is a hazard from flying objects. Non-side shield are not acceptable eye protection for impact hazards. The frames of safety glasses are constructed of metal and or plastic and can be fitted with either corrective or plano impact resistant lenses. Side shields may be incorporated into the frames of safety glasses when needed. Consider each component of safety glasses when selecting the appropriate device for your workplace. OSHA Eye and Face Protection E-Tool 2002. Goggles are tight-fitting eye protection that completely cover the eyes, eye sockets, and the facial area immediately surrounding the eyes and provide protection from impact, dust, and splashes. Some goggles will fit over corrective lenses. Safety goggles are intended to shield the wearer's eyes from impact hazards, such as flying fragments, objects, large chips, and particles. Goggles fit the face immediately surrounding the eyes and form a protective seal around the eyes. This prevents objects from entering under or around the goggles. Safety goggles may incorporate prescription lenses mounted behind protective lenses for individuals requiring vision correction. Take time to consider specific lens frame and ventilation options when selecting safety goggles. Constructed of vulcanized fiber or fiberglass and fitted with a filtered lens, welding shields protect eyes from burns caused by infrared or intense radiant light. They also protect both the eyes and face from flying sparks, metal spatter, and slag chips produced during welding, brazing, soldering, and cutting operations. OSHA requires filter lenses to have a shade number appropriate to protect against the specific hazard of the work being performed in order to protect against harmful light radiation. OSHA Publication 3151-12R 2003. Face shields are intended to protect the entire face or portions of it from impact hazards such as flying fragments, objects, large chips, and particles. When worn alone, face shields do not protect employees from impact hazards. Use face shields in combination with safety glasses or goggles, even in the absence of dust or potential splashes, for additional protection beyond that offered by safety glasses or goggles alone. OSHA and Eye Face Protection E-Tool 2002. Employers must ensure that employees who wear prescription RX lenses or contacts use personal protective equipment, PPE, that incorporates the prescription or use eye protection that can be worn over prescription lenses. Workers who wear prescription glasses must also wear required eye protection. Eye and face protection that fits comfortably over glasses is available. Safety goggles and safety glasses may incorporate prescription lenses. Dust and chemicals present additional hazards to contact wearers. OSHA recommends that workers have an extra pair of contacts or eyeglasses in case of contact failure or loss. OSHA Eye and Face Protection e-Tool 2002. In order to select an appropriate respirator, you must conduct an exposure assessment to determine the type and amount of hazardous exposure. Take into account the factors that can influence respirator selection, such as job site and worker characteristics. Understand the assigned protection factors. Know the various kinds of respirators and their relevant characteristics. Wize Solutions only requires those that are mixing grout for the footings that work in the mixing tent to wear respirators. Noise or unwanted sound is one of the most common health problems in American workplaces. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, estimates that 30 million workers in the U.S. are exposed to hazardous noise. Exposure to high levels of noise may cause hearing loss, create physical and psychological stress, reduce productivity, interfere with communication, and contribute to accidents and injuries by making it difficult to hear warning signals. OSHA requires employers to determine if workers are exposed to excessive noise in the workplace. If so, the employers must implement feasible engineering or administrative controls to eliminate or reduce hazardous levels of noise. Where controls are not sufficient, employers must implement an effective hearing conservation program. Hearing protection devices, HPD, are considered the last option to control exposure to noise. HPDs are generally used during the necessary time to take to implement engineering or administrative controls, or when such controls are not feasible. This slide shows some examples of hearing protection devices. If a workplace hazard assessment reveals that employees face potential injury to hands and arms that cannot be eliminated through engineering and work practice controls, employers must ensure that employees wear appropriate protection. Potential hazards include skin absorption of harmful substances, chemical or thermal burns, electrical dangers, bruises, abrasions, cuts, punctures, fractures, and amputations. Protective equipment includes gloves, finger guards, and arm coverings or elbow-length gloves. OSHA publication 3151 12R 2003. There are many types of gloves available today to protect against a wide variety of hazards. The nature of hazard and the operation involved will affect the selection of gloves. The variety of potential occupational hand injuries makes selecting the right pair of gloves challenging. It is essential that employees use gloves specifically designed for the hazards and tasks found in their workplace, because gloves designed for one function may not protect against a different function, even though they may appear to be an appropriate protective device. The following are examples of some factors that may influence the selection of protective gloves for a workplace. Types of chemicals handled, nature of contact, total immersion, splash, etc. Duration of contact, area requiring protection, hand only, forearm, or arm. Grip requirements, dry, wet, oily. Thermal protection, size and comfort. Abrasions, resistance requirements. Gloves made from a wide variety of materials are designed for many types of workplace hazards. In general, gloves fall into 4 groups. Gloves made of leather, canvas, or metal mesh. Fabric and coated fabric gloves. Chemical and liquid resistant gloves. Insulating rubber. Automation's departments require the wear of Kevlar sleeves when working in the system to protect from cuts and abrasions. Employees who face possible foot or leg injuries from falling or rolling objects, or from crushing or penetrating materials, should wear protective footwear. Also, employees whose work involves exposure to hot substances or corrosive or poisonous materials must have protective gear to cover exposed body parts, including legs and feet. Examples of situations in which an employee should wear foot and/or leg protection include when heavy objects such as barrels or tools might roll onto or fall on the employee's feet, working from sharp objects such as nails or spikes that could pierce the soles or uppers of ordinary shoes. Exposure to molten metal that might splash on feet or legs, working on or around hot, wet, or slippery surfaces, and working when electrical hazards are present. OSHA Publication 3151 12R 2003. Safety shoes have impact-resistant toes and heat-resistant soles that protect the feet against hot work surfaces common in roofing, paving, and hot metal industries. The metal insoles of some safety shoes protect against puncture wounds. Safety shoes may also be designed to be electrically conductive to prevent the buildup of static electricity in areas with the potential for explosive atmospheres or non-conductive to protect workers from workplace electrical hazards. Metatarsal guards protect the instep area from impact and compression. Made of aluminum, steel, fiber, or plastic, these guards may be strapped to the outside of the shoes. Electrically conductive shoes provide protection against the buildup of static electricity. Employees exposed to electrical hazards must never wear conductive shoes. Employees who face possible bodily injury of any kind that cannot be eliminated through engineering, work practice, or administrative controls must wear appropriate body protection while performing their jobs. In addition to cuts and radiation, the following are examples of workplace hazards that could cause bodily injury. Temperature extremes, hot splashes from molten metals and other hot liquids, potential impacts from tools, machinery, and materials, hazardous chemicals. There are many varieties of protective clothing available for specific hazards. Employers are required to ensure that their employees wear personal protective equipment only for the parts of the body exposed to possible injury. Examples of body protection include laboratory coats, coveralls, vests, jackets, aprons, surgical gowns, and full body suits. If a hazard assessment indicates a need for full body protection against toxic substances or harmful physical agents, the clothing should be carefully inspected before each use. It must fit each worker properly and it must function properly and for the purpose for which it is intended. Protective clothing comes in a variety of materials, each effective against particular hazards, such as paper-like fiber used for disposable suits provide protection against dust and splashes. Treated wool and cotton adapts well to changing temperatures, is comfortable and fire resistant, and protects against dust, abrasions, and rough and irritating surfaces. Duck is a closely woven cotton fabric that protects against cuts and bruises when handling heavy, sharp, or rough materials. Leather is often used to protect against dry heat and flames. Rubber, rubberized fabrics, neoprene, and plastics protect against certain chemicals and physical hazards. When chemical or physical hazards are present, check with the clothing manufacturer to ensure that the material selected will provide protection against these specific hazards. OSHA Publication 3151 12R 2003. Employers are required to train each employee who must use PPE. Employees must be trained to know at least the following: what PPE is necessary, how to properly put on, take off, adjust, and wear the PPE, the limitations of the PPE, proper care, maintenance, useful life, and disposal of PPE. Employers should make sure that each employee demonstrates an understanding of the PPE training as well as the ability to properly wear and use PPE before they are allowed to perform work requiring that use of the PPE. If an employer believes that a previously trained employee is not demonstrating the proper understanding and skill level in the use of PPE, that employee should receive retraining. Other situations that require additional or retraining of employees include the following circumstances: changes in the workplace or in the type of required PPE that make prior training obsolete. The employer must document the training of each employee required to wear or use PPE by preparing a certification containing the name of each employee trained, the date of training, and a clear identification of the subject of the certification. Training is conducted when the employee goes through the individual required trainings, hands-on training, and JHAs. To ensure the greatest possible protection for employees in the workplace, the cooperative efforts of both employers and employees will help in establishing and maintaining a safe and healthful work environment. In general, employers are responsible for performing a hazard assessment of the workplace to identify and control physical and health hazards, identifying and providing appropriate PPE for employees, training employees in the use and care of the PPE, maintaining PPE, including replacing worn or damaged PPE, periodically reviewing, updating, and evaluating the effectiveness of the PPE program. On May 15, 2008, a new OSHA rule about employer payment for PPE went into effect. With few exceptions, OSHA now requires employers to pay for personal protective equipment used to comply with OSHA standards. The final rule does not create new requirements regarding what PPE employers must provide. The standard makes clear that employers cannot require workers to provide their own PPE, and the workers' use of PPE they already own must be completely voluntary. Even when a worker provides his or her own PPE, the employer must ensure that the equipment is adequate to protect the worker from the hazards at the workplace. Examples of PPE that employers must pay for include metatarsal foot protection, rubber boots with steel toes, non-prescription eye protection, prescription eyewear inserts, lenses for full-face respirators, goggles and face shields, firefighting PPE, helmet, gloves, boots, proximity suits, full gear, hard hats, hearing protection, welding PPE. Payment exceptions under the OSHA rule. Employers are not required to pay for some PPE in certain circumstances. Non-specialty safety toe protective footwear, including steel-toe shoes or boots, and non-specialty prescription safety eyewear, provided that the employer permits such items to be worn off the job site. OSHA based this decision on the fact that this type of equipment is very personal, is often used outside the workplace, and that it is taken by workers from job site to job site and employer to employer. Everyday clothing such as long sleeve shirts, long pants, street shoes, and normal work boots. Ordinary clothing, skin creams, or other items used solely for protection from weather such as winter coats, jackets, gloves, parkas, rubber boots, hats, raincoats, ordinary sunglasses, and sunscreen. Items such as hairnets and gloves worn by food workers for consumer safety. Lifting belts because their value in protecting the back is questionable. When the employee has lost or intentionally damaged the PPE and it must be replaced. In general, employees should properly wear PPE, attend training sessions on PPE, care for, clean, and maintain PPE, and inform a supervisor of the need to repair or replace PPE. Employers must assess the workplace for hazards, use engineering and work practice controls to eliminate or reduce hazards, select and provide appropriate PPE at no cost to employees to protect them. This concludes your training on PPE. Please proceed to take the exam.